What interests me is all of these layers of people's different perspectives and points of view and how that kind of hangs together across that as well.
Men and women who are remembered have done things differently. How do you see that journey of bringing more of that skills?
People that don't fit in the plan are the ones that are prepared to go and have a crack.
How do you create young people to learn the skills of thinking differently? Yeah.
The vast majority of people in the world want to get up, have breakfast, have a roof over their head, go to work, do their job, come home, spend some time with their kids, spend some time with their friends, and then get up and do it all again.
Which is more effective? Is problem solving a contact sport? I think AI without expertise doesn't function well.
But if everybody's using AI to do all of the crap stuff in the world, or go to uni or train or whatever, at what point do we just get to that beigeness across the answers of everything? And if we do, then what do we do as human beings?
What 3 things they should start doing immediately? Welcome, Andy. How are you?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Doing very well. It's good to sit down today and have this conversation. We've been trying to do this for the last probably 4, 5, 6 years, but this is a good opportunity today. Before we get started on questions, I want you to give us a brief backdrop.
A beef?
Not a brief.
A beef backdrop?
You make it nervous.
How far back do you want to go? So, I suppose...
Tell a narrative.
Yeah, so I suppose...
Give me a story.
Yeah, all right. So once upon a time, I guess kind of where this whole innovation... Well, not innovation. Really just thinking differently about stuff is... I went through high school. The traditional approach is you go through high school, you get your TE as it was back then, you go to university, you get a job, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't get 50% in English.
Yeah.
So, which my kids think is hilarious because they say that's a fail, but I got a D. So we have this fight all the time about what was going on. But back in the day, what happened is if you didn't get 50% in English, you couldn't go to university, hands down. And I suppose it was the first, that first hurdle of going, well, if I can't go to university, what do I do? And even though at the time I duxed the school in what was computer studies, which would now be, information technology and then, just tech generally. And still the unis went, nah, you're not coming. So I kind of set off on my own path, went through a private program, 3-4 months, got a job out of that. But it was, I guess the traditional approach just didn't move fast enough for me. I always wanted to kind of challenge myself and I could see ways of solving problems that other people couldn't see. And so I was probably just a pain in the ass, really, for companies hiring them. So I'd had 2 or 3 jobs in Perth, and then went back to the UK for a year, and I worked in nightclubs and bars and things like that for about a year, and then came back to Perth and tried to fit back in the mould again. Couldn't really do that. Even though I was trying more IT stuff, just trying to do those things, trying to challenge myself. And it was then that I had kind of my first business and again, fell into it, started putting parties on at nightclubs and in warehouses with a mate of mine. And then it started getting a little bit dodgy, which we didn't want to deal with. So instead of just putting the party on, what we did is we pivoted into, well, how can we tour the DJs that we were ultimately consuming, right, for a party before. So we did that for a year, had an amazing year, met my wife, or now wife, and then went back to the UK for another year. And I guess the thread that kind of held all this together was still working, worked for, big corporates like Arthur Andersen, Andersen Consulting, which again was counterintuitive, I think, to what I was kind of doing on the side, which we would now call a side hustle, right, in sort of 2020 speak. Did that, went through that, came back to Perth, mid-90s, and Perth was kind of dead. I went from living in Covent Garden, the middle of Covent Garden, to coming back to Perth, and it was just like tumbleweeds up and down the terrace. So after a year of being here, me and my wife, or soon-to-be wife, went to Melbourne. And again, had a similar sort of approach, kind of fell into, big corporates again.
Yeah.
So UBS, Goldman Sachs, JB Were, big financial houses. Yeah. And again, I kind of ended up in this position of just trying to solve problems differently. Like, it didn't really fit in the traditional structures and hierarchy. And I guess I didn't want to play that game. And I had an IT manager at the time, and he said, look, the difference between me and you is I've got an education behind me and you don't. So he goes, we don't want to lose you, but we'll support you to go and get some sort of training. And at the time I was thinking about doing an MBA. And I looked at the structure and everything, and I was like, am I going to put 2 or 3 years into this? This is the most boring thing that I can see. So I went out and I just went and kind of spoke to a whole bunch of people that had travelled that journey, a whole bunch of management consultants as well. And the one thing that they all came back and said is it was really, really valuable from a network perspective, like meeting people.
Yeah.
But I was pretty good at that anyway. So I kind of thought, well, why am I going to invest this time and money and everything else? And it was actually my wife that came across someone in her job. She was working at BCG at the time, and she said, oh, look, there's this woman that came in and she was talking about career development and what was going on. She goes, I don't know why, but you need to go and speak to her. So I did, and straight away she just went, there's no chance you're ever going to finish an MBA, but have you heard of this thing called an MEI, which is a Masters of Entrepreneurship and Innovation? Yeah. And literally within a week and a half I'd signed up and I was in, and it was kind of like I'd found my tribe as well. And so while I did that, we had a couple of kids as well, like you do, you just pile everything on at the same time. I came out the end of that. I negotiated a redundancy from Goldman Sachs at the time. And I guess that really then gave us this, I don't know, not ability, but confidence to have a crack at something. So I started working for an IT services company in Melbourne. We came back to Perth in 2 or 3 months for Christmas. And I said I'd have a sniff around and see what the market was like here. And went back to the CEO and the board and said, look, I think this is what we should do. I think this is how we take it from on the East Coast into WA. Yeah. And they said, cool, do you want to go and do it? So we were coming back for a year, about 15 years ago. And that kind of started that journey then. So it was, it was building a business with somebody else's money. And then when I left that, then I started building my own businesses as well, IT consulting businesses. I rolled one into another business, grew that business, came out of that, and then built a business here called Atomic Sky. So I founded that with another guy to help other people coming through with a lot of the mistakes that I'd made over the years as well. And so this was we started it probably 12 years ago. We raised some money into it. We got an investor in. But just couldn't really get it going at the time. And then I had to come out of that because I had to grow up and had to get, apparently a real job to try and get some regular income coming in. But when I left, the phone started ringing and people started coming to me and saying, oh, now that you're out, do you want to come and do this for us? And do you want to do that? And do you want to do this? And so that's coming up to kind of 8 years ago, where I've been out by myself, just working on creative thinking, innovation, corporates, deep tech, science, startup kind of coaching, keynote speaking, anything really around supporting people that want to think differently and do things differently as well.
Wow. So that's, thank you for the lovely...
I told you how far back do you want to go?
That's good. But how does the brain work of Andy in terms of the guy who runs nightclubs or
Yeah.
be part of nightclubs and running, big parties with DJs and stuff to now running design thinking sessions or creative thinking sessions with a group of people. So it's the same, you're running a jam session with different set of people.
Yeah.
But what's the commonality across these two different roles?
So one is, you mentioned design thinking, which is a process to get in the mindset of somebody's head and, get them to think differently through that process. Fundamentally, I think that the string that holds all of this together is I love people. And I love solving problems for people and with people. Mm-hmm. So even growing up, I had like the Rubik's Cube and then all these other things as well. And I often say this to people is I'm naturally and driven around curiosity of human beings and how they interact. Mm-hmm. So I take a very big empathetic approach.
Yeah.
I think we get too hung up in the solutions, right, and how we make things, how we have an idea. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's like when I'm working with a group of people, it's really like edutainment. Right, so you're trying to keep people interested in what you're going through, but you've got to make it relevant for what they're trying to achieve. And I guess that's kind of back in the nightclub days. That's what we were doing as well. Is people wanted to go out and enjoy themselves and have fun, and
you're facilitating the enjoyment, or entertainment, and edutainment.
Yeah, it's just people.
Yeah.
It's just people, we're an amazing species of stuff that when you look around like here, all the stuff that's been created, and especially over the last sort of, 30, 40, 50 years as well. But also we're a bit stupid as humans, right? We're doing some shit to the world that really we shouldn't be doing. But it's then what interests me is all of these layers of people's different perspectives and points of view and how that kind of hangs together across that as well.
From an historic perspective, men and women who are remembered have done things differently and have brought something new to the world, have brought something innovative or something better ways of doing the same thing. How do you see that journey of bringing more of that skills of thinking differently to everyone?
So you're right. And we do, right? We put people, we put products, we put services, we put them on pedestals when they become part and parcel of just the day-to-day psyche of what we do. But it's usually the misfits and the change agents and the people that don't fit in the plan are the ones that are prepared to go and have a crack. And it's. For me, it's always been about the journey rather than the destination, right, and the end point. Like I'm not big on setting goals. I just go out and go, that looks interesting, it looks fun, let's disappear down that pathway and see what happens. But having said that, there are a lot of people that possess those type of traits that do things for good.
Yeah.
Right, and then they also use those kind of traits as well to go back and use them for nefarious issues and those type of things as well. But I think you do have to be a little bit unhinged and a little bit different, and to drive that forward as well.
But in terms of the training curriculum from an education point of view, how do you create young people to learn the skills of thinking differently?
Okay.
That's fine.
So I'm kind of torn, right? Because in one sense...
Because the traditional education model is not producing...
And so this is the thing, right? There's an element of... I often say this to, particularly a lot of my corporate clients as well. Because what I do is I'll have a shorter engagement with them. Because I say what happens is if I was to work full time for you, I'd be a pain in the ass, right? And you wouldn't know what to do with me. And the initial excitement, when kids get a puppy, that excitement kind of wanes and drops off. And then you just go, oh, this is just a nightmare. It doesn't fit, right? And so I'm often thinking about that with the education system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where I've just got two daughters that have now finished high school and are in uni, and we've got to understand that primarily the vast majority of people in the world want to get up,
Mm-hmm.
have breakfast, have a roof over their head, go to work, do their job, come home, spend some time with their kids, spend some time with their friends, and then get up and do it all again, right? So the vast majority of people, that is where they get their comfort and their fulfillment and their purpose in life. People that think differently, they think creatively, they're, you know, all these kind of things as well, it is a smaller percentage of the people that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this balance of going, we still have to have educational systems for people to pop out into the world as we know it, okay? And you can break down that educational system because it's really hard. Because you've got schools, you've got curriculum, you've got, you know, universities that
TAFE.
rely on people, you've got TAFE, they're all kind of different. And if you're trying to change that system, you start to realise how interconnected everything is and how hard it is to change the system, right? Where all of a sudden you go, oh, I want to create something for free thinkers and creative thinkers and everything else. Because you can do that, but then they've got to pop out into the system, you know, the matrix, as it is, at the other end of that. But I do believe that what we do is we dumb down kids around creative thinking. So we put them into school, and then what happens is, you know, a teacher's got 25, 30 kids, and you can't naturally manage that amount of kids and free thinkers and everything else, right? It has to be structured because the teachers can't cope. And the teachers have been trained in a certain way to be able to handle that as well. So, but I do think something needs to happen because with the rise of AI at the moment, the one thing we can do as humans to kind of differentiate ourselves is maintain that creative thinking, understand that empathy-driven approach, you know, interacting with humans. I think, you know, the pandemic taught us this. We still need to connect. We have this desire and need to connect as humans. But a lot of the you know, the boring, mundane shit is that's going to be able to be done by AI and can be done at the moment. So I think we have to train and support kids around creative thinking, but also this aptitude of lifelong learning as well. So consistently going out there and going, right, I've learned everything I've got at the moment, but what else can I learn now? And how do I drive, you know, new behaviours and new tools and new technologies and those types of things?
From a corporate point of view, when you are running a large organization of more than 1,000 plus people, and you need some consistency of delivery, and you need to have a structure. Hence, there's a hierarchy or no hierarchy of what sort. How do you bring people out of that, you know, the circle of doing and not doing and doing and doing, to come out and then think differently to solve the same problem they've been working on for long now?
Yeah. So you have to change. So I've got a mantra that's if you want a different outcome, you have to change the inputs. And so if you want to think differently, you know, people sit there and go, oh, you know, creative thinking, that's great. So I'll go into work, I'll sit down, I'll open my laptop up and I'll be creative. And then they go, ding, you know, something comes into mail and you're like, ding, ding. And I'm like, that's not being creative. So I'm a big believer in, and I've learnt this over the years, I have different environments for different types of thinking. Okay, which is great when you're out by yourself, because you've got nobody else that's answerable to yourself, right? But if you're in an organisation and you turn around and go, oh, look, I've got to do some thinking, so I've got to go to a cafe, or I've got to go and sit in a park, or I've got to go and do this. Hierarchies go, you're just slacking off, right? And we're seeing this at the moment where people are starting to say, everyone's got to come back into the office. You've got to be back in the office. And the biggest thing for me is that is about restraining that thinking, because, you know, the culture of an organisation and how it works isn't the big words that people put up on the walls around these are our cultural and this is our vision and values and everything else. The culture is a direct representation of how the humans in that organisation actually interact and connect with each other, right? And they live it and they drive it, right? And so quite often people go, oh, I know what my culture is, but I just can't pinpoint it. And it's because it's a feeling, right? That coming back to that AI stuff, AI can't do that, right? It can't have the feelings of what's going on in the organisation. So I do think we're going to have to see a different type of leader. There's a lot of people in leadership positions that have been the best technically, right? And they end up in these senior leadership positions. And they don't get people, you know, because they turn around and they go, hey, Dev, I want you to do some work. You report for me. I'm telling you that's what needs to be done, right? And so you get these layers at the top of organisations and they're catastrophic. But then you'll get someone that comes in that goes, I want to do this differently. I want to lead differently. They might be a bit more entrepreneurial. But they've then got to work around the people and the systems that are there, and you'll find that those people then turn up going, this doesn't feel right for me because I've been mentored and led by other people in a certain way to get to this position. And guess what? I want more money. I want more power. Yeah, ego gets in the way. So they go, well, how can I get to that next position? And so there's this conformity, I think, that has to be broken at the top of organisations that then may start to actually have an impact as we go through the organisational structure.
And I think one is free thinking or creative thinking, which is at a higher end of innovation, but at the normal end of, on a regular basis, you're problem solving. And there's a problem within the organisation, you're solving those problems on a regular basis.
Yeah.
How does, what do you think problem solving, working from home, and then, you know, coming back to work, which is more effective? Is problem solving a contact sport?
Contact sport. Yes. But a light
Can you solve problems?
A light touch contact sport.
Can you solve problems similarly in two situations, working from home versus, you know, back at work?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in like the technology for us to connect online. You know, everybody's used to Zoom, Teams and everything else, right? But products like Skype were created in the 90s, you know, 20 odd years ago. But it took a pandemic to get us going, oh, this actually works.
Yeah.
And the technology had to get better, right? We were forced into that. There is no substitute for sitting across from someone, right, and riffing on trying to sort something out, because there's a whole bunch of triggers between two humans that you don't get in a two-dimensional world online. Okay, and I don't know if you remember back, but when the pandemic happened and everybody moved online, apart from the fact we were sitting consuming stuff on Zoom all the time, people were tired. And I did some research into it, and what I found is that our brains are used to creating patterns, right? We build neural pathways to do a whole bunch of stuff. When you're sitting in front of someone, there's a depth of perception to you.
Yeah.
So I can see lots of different things that are going on, and your mind gets used to that. But then you go online and it's two-dimensional. And so your mind is trying to work out and go, I'm used to seeing Dev in 3 dimensions and can see depth and perception and everything else. And now I just see him on a screen. And so our brains were kind of trying to unwire what we'd done previously. And when we try and unwire that, we get tighter because we use more energy. And so all of a sudden we're kind of sitting there going, shit, hang on a minute, this is hard. And I think that approach is we have to sit there and go, I can do some individual thinking by myself, but when we're trying to bounce it around to make the problem better, there is nothing apart from sitting across from someone. But what we should be doing is teaching people about different thinking styles and how it happens and how the mind works, and then, you know, basically treating them like grown-ups and going, you need to work this out yourself. Right? So if you sit down and go, I want to go and, you know, I've done some thinking, I've got some sketches, I've got some prototypes, you know, the beginning of that design thinking process you were talking about.
Yeah.
But then how do we come together and actually do what we need to do? And the answer isn't always, as much as I love a good post-it note, the answer isn't always in a room, post-it notes on the wall. We get everybody together, everybody feels connected and valued and everything else. Sometimes you've got to try and pick a winning team to get the problem solved in a way that you need to get it solved as well.
Mm-hmm. Historically, Australia has been a bit innovative, and we have identified few things before everybody in the world. And what do you see the kind of innovation we are receiving in the last couple of decades? Are we the leaders of innovation? Are we the leaders in terms of creating new industries, new products? And new...
So I'd
give us a perspective of the last decade or so.
So I think there's this juxtaposition always of we've got to do the stuff that we do, because it comes back to, like I said before, around you've got the change agents, the misfits, the leaders, you've got all that. But then you need the efficiency, reducing risk, all that type of stuff to harness the value that you can potentially create on this other side. And I think at the moment, Australia has been very much focused on that drive and efficiency, especially around mining. It's a relatively well-known supply chain, value chain, opportunity chain as you go through, right? And, the prosperity of Australia lives on the stuff that we dig out the ground and ship off. And that's okay, but at some point, God knows when, that won't continue. So what are we doing as a society? And I think this is it. We look to our leaders to try and do this, and people in my space look to people that are leading the country to be able to do that. And I just don't think they get it at the moment, right? I've got this slide that I use a lot of the time with my corporate clients predominantly, and it's a guy hanging off, with a couple of fingers like a rock climber hanging off a cliff face, and I just put the words "oh shit" on it. And I think when the problem is big enough, when the oh shit moment is big enough, we can move heaven and earth with humans and resources and everything else to actually solve that problem. And we saw this, we saw this globally with the pandemic. But what happens is we become fat and lazy again and going, it's just too easy to keep doing this. We can just, we'll just say we're supporting these type of things as well, right? And it's hard work to do something differently. But I can tell you when the challenge comes and humans are forced to do something differently, then all of a sudden the momentum shifts and somebody has to do it. So whether it's a country, whether it's a society, whether it's a company, or whether it's a bunch of people trying to solve smaller community-based things, there is always a tipping point, and then everybody gets behind it.
But creating new industries for the coming next 10, 20 years, one need to invest today in innovation. One need to invest in, how can we fail early and fail harder? And then let's try different things, because mining might not be around or be the one solution for wealth creation. We need to have more sources of wealth creation for the economy and for the country.
Yeah, it's what's a polite way of saying it? I think when you get old, right, and you have some grey hair and some white hair, things go in cycles. And when I had some software consulting businesses, and the kind of software tech bro people were, you had to engage with those people and use them to run your business, right? And I remember at the time, so this is probably nearly 15 years ago when I started it, we were paying probably people that were, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 years out of uni, right? 120 to 150 grand a year, right? Because their skills were needed to do the work that we needed to do. Now, you roll forward 15 years and it's not 100% there yet, but AI can create the code that we used to pay these people to do, Okay. So all of a sudden, we start to see this, potentially start seeing this decline as things drop off.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we really need to be wary of that because, again, if we're not upskilling people, if we're not doing things differently, then those people drop off the other end. Now, when they drop off the other end, you know, they're 15, 20 years older, so they've probably got, you know, a big mortgage. They've got school fees. You know, they want the latest car. They want all of these things. But all of a sudden, they might not have the means to be able to provide for that lifestyle. And I guess the counter argument of that is, with our political leaders, is they get elected for 3 or 4 years. And so it takes a long time to kind of move some of this stuff, you know, to match the trends that we're trying to match in the world. And so, you know, if you're a politician, your number one job is to get re-elected and keep your job. And so if populist politics is all about getting re-elected, then you want to be talking to the masses, right? Which at the moment is all around cost of living and energy prices and those kind of things. It's not really about how do we try new things? How do we come up with new industries? How do we do this? How do we do that? Because if it doesn't work, right, and then all of a sudden there's sound bites that are on TikTok and everything else, those politicians can lose their job really quickly. And they're in exactly the same position, right? They might be higher up here than, you know, the average punter further down here. But it's the same kind of process. And so everyone's just trying to be the same as everybody else without sticking their neck out to go and do something differently. And I think that fundamentally we need to try and break that cycle somehow.
We have seen globally, innovation has come through few chambers or few echo chambers or called ecosystems. And to create a thriving ecosystem, what are the mix and, you know, what are the mix of conditions to happen in that area to make sure that, you know, the ecosystem will thrive to create enough innovation, enough startups so that fuel the next leg of growth? Yeah.
So I think there's a whole, like you said, right, there's a number of different things that need to happen in this space. So one is we need to support the people and the free thinkers that have the ability to go out there and do it. Government needs to get involved to facilitate the conversations and the support, right? Because at the early stage, we need to do more in this space, right? But unfortunately, it's not sexy. But if there's a massive problem in the economy, then governments will invest more, right? But when it's not, it comes back to that counter approach. So government plays a role, right? We need like deep tech, right? So science and research, okay? Which is where I spend a lot of my time at the moment as well. We need corporates, right? We need big organisations that have got access to where the clients that you potentially need, they need to form a part of this discussion and narrative as well. And then we need the ability to fund these things to actually get them kind of ramping up and working. And I think, especially in WA, we have portions of it, but there's nobody really going, right, we've got to ramp this up. Like, I remember, I can't remember how long ago it was. It might have been 2011, 2012. There was a Startup WA report done, and it said, you know, this is going to employ, I don't know how many thousands of people and create billion-dollar industries. And that's just not progressed like that, right? And I think it's because it's too easy to go, oh, we'll just keep digging stuff up.
And that's the political will and the governments. But do you think this is a free market model? The innovation has always thrived in a free market model when individual is, you know, rewarded on individual effort. And that's what the driver of an individual to create new things and new products and new services. But why do you think, you know, government support, which might not be relevant in that space, why is not people in the free market whether they are corporates, whether they are individuals coming together to organize themselves to create these things.
So, look, it does happen around the world. Absolutely. I think we struggle in Australia to do that. And I don't know if it's, again, if it's because we're kind of fat and lazy, right, across the board. I still remember, the mining boom came off and everyone was okay, right? And then we had the global financial crisis. Everyone was okay. We had the pandemic, right? And especially in WA, everyone was okay. And so I just don't think we've had to wear the pain enough to make it front of mind for people. And to pick up on a point you said before around, creating new industries, I saw this report, like a macroeconomic report, and it said, the only thing that the Australian government's created in the last however long is the NDIS as a new industry to support, people with disabilities.
Yeah.
We haven't done anything else, right? There's a lot of technology and science that's going on in the background, but I don't think we're seen as leaders in that, probably like we were 30 or 40 years ago. But even back then, the pathway was go offshore. If you've got something, go offshore. Now, I know the federal government is saying we've got this made in Australia policy at the moment as well. And that's okay for traditional manufacturing, even manufacturing, like advanced manufacturing and that type of stuff as well. But really, we need to be able to create new industries, right, and lead that charge rather than just wait and see what's happening around the world as well.
What's your experience with young people who might not be attracted towards the traditional roles of the structure, of the hierarchy, or of the big organization? So what do you think are the opportunities for the younger Australians?
Look, there's a lot of opportunities, but I think everybody not everybody, but a lot of people sit there now, and it's predicated on social media of, you can have 3 or 4 side hustles and you can make money here and you can make money there, and so everyone just go off and do it. And there are some people that can do that, but it comes back to what I said before, is that the vast majority of people want to get up, they want to go to work, they want to do what they've always done. They don't want to be sitting there going, I'm doing something online, or I'm trialling this, or I'm trialling that. They're not kind of engaged to be able to do that. And so this almost this privilege which comes from people that have done that. So any young person today can do this. Well, I just don't think that's the case, right? It's the same as saying probably 30 years ago, any young person can come from, poverty and trials and tribulations in their life and be Prime Minister. Well, yeah, the pathway can be, right? But there's a whole bunch of shit that goes on, right, to try and make that happen. And so I think it's, while the opportunity is there to be able to do it, the desire and the focus and everything else, with everything else that's going on, is actually a hell of a lot harder than people think.
You have helped organizations solve their corporate problems, but I want you to help solve the problem of the country, which is, one of the big problem use case for you. If we have to brainstorm right now, and if the bigger problem for you to solve is the housing crisis, what are the key elements you will talk about, and what are the people beyond the table, and how would you solve that problem, the housing problem?
So a nice, easy problem to solve.
Yeah.
So how would I solve it? All right, so there's a whole bunch of technology out there, right, where we can print houses, okay? It's not quite ready yet. I mean, we're just starting to see technologies come through where this can start to happen. But again, it's this same principle of you've got a new way of doing things, but you've got an incumbent ecosystem of how it expects things to happen. And
that's the regulation.
And that's regulation, it's builders, it's
associations,
associations,
lobby groups.
and because everybody's got an opinion of how they operate in that ecosystem. So just because you've got new technology doesn't mean it's going to disrupt this without a whole bunch of lubrication and stuff to make it happen, right? And an example of it is I've got a couple of houses being built next door to me at the moment, and the front one kicked off in COVID, and I was talking to the builder, and he was like, oh, man, so hard to find brickies, the cost has gone through the roof, we can't get bricks, we can't do this, we can't do that. And then he said, oh, what do you do? And I, kind of told him. And he said, he goes, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. And I said, well, it is, but it's also, we've got to work out how we do this differently. And somebody has to take the risk and take their first step forward to solve this differently, especially in housing and how we, construct houses and everything else. And I said, so, have you ever looked at, different building techniques? No, why would I do that? Right? I've always built houses, for the last 40 years exactly the same way. My challenge at the moment is I can't get enough brickies. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? If you looked at, could you use concrete panels? Could you use some form of, a framed house? Can you use that? No, not doing that. No, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing that. And so even though his problem was hard because they couldn't build this house quick enough, he still wasn't interested to actually have a look at new technologies that could be used. And I think this is the challenge with housing, right, that we've got. We've had a whole bunch of people come to Australia, which is fantastic. But we've forgotten about where are we going to put these people, right? And, it's people that work in the services and the community services will tell you the number one thing, the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is shelter, right, and safety. And so we've said to a whole bunch of people, right, through a whole bunch of different scenarios, come and we'll look after you, right? And Australia is the land of opportunity, probably. And we haven't got anywhere to put them. And so then all of a sudden it's going to create all of these other issues, right, around prices of houses going up, rents going up. But it's got to be someone that's brave to turn around and say, actually, we're going to do different types of housing for people. We're going to have a crack at building them quicker. We're going to use newer technologies. We might have a new model. Build to rent is starting to come through now, right? Which has been around in Europe for tens of years. But again, it comes back to that someone's got to have a crack at doing something differently. And then the government's got to support it. But then it's hard because if it doesn't work, then then people turn around and say, oh, it was the government's fault. And then if you're a minister, you don't get re-elected. And then you go, I don't have a job. And now what am I going to go and do? Because I can't just live on my pension for the rest of my life. Although you could.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, it's good enough. So the next challenge for you in terms of the problem to solve would be, we have two broader states in the country. One is the welfare state and one is the economic state. This one produces income and then, we spend money in the welfare state and other infrastructure. So how do the welfare state is growing much faster than the economic state. Yeah. So how do you make sure that the economy catches up and then economy grows faster? Both our people, because we can't let people go.
No,
so how do you make sure that happens?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, and if you keep going back over the years, that's the role to or the mechanism to support those people is taxes, right? Whether you like it or not, that's the role that you're doing. So, so if one side of the whole economic system is increasing and rising, you have to look at how that is all funded. And I think, this is potentially where governments go, we've got more costs because we're doing things to support more people, right? NDIS, ageing population, healthcare. But the money's got to come from somewhere. So you can either keep borrowing money, which governments are doing, or you can turn around and say, actually, we need to look at how do we change this system and balance it more accordingly. And I remember I got a friend in Sydney, and he's got like a little community kind of T-shirt business. And one of the things he says is billionaires are a policy failure. Mm-hmm. And as much as you would hate to do that, and I know a lot of billionaires give back through philanthropic endeavours and all those types of things as well, there is a wealth will flow to those type of peoples through multi-generational wealth as well, all that kind of stuff. So we've got to look at how we can try and get that more in balance. And again, it's a 25-year cycle to make that happen. Mm-hmm. You can't just do it and go, we're going to make this happen, right? Not when we're electing politicians for 3 and 4 years, because they just go, oh, it'll be somebody else's problem. Mm-hmm. I'll be out of politics by then. I'll leave it for somebody else to sort out. Yeah, and so then you turn around and go, well, how do we get more tax? Uh-huh. Oh, we need more people in Australia. Mm-hmm. So let's bring them in, and we're still running relatively well in unemployment. Mm-hmm. So that should get more people paying tax. So we've got more people. Mm-hmm. But at some point, when the ageing population drops off as well, the world is, I can't remember the report I saw, but the world is predicted to get to about 10 billion people. But then because of the amount of people that are older, they're all going to start to drop off. Mm-hmm. So if they drop off and they're not, and we haven't got the taxes to support them because we haven't got people younger coming through, or they're living in the metaverse, Web 3.0 stuff, and they're sitting there with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies or whatever. How do we then get that money back into the system to support those, that really we should be supporting as humans? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The public service has been growing on a consistently basis, across, whether it's federal or whether it's Commonwealth or it's state. How do you bring efficiencies through critical thinking and thinking differently within the public service? Because as soon as there's a new legislation passed and there's more sort of people being hired to organize that, and then that creates, and multiple layers of policies and regs creates another layer of complexity. Yeah. How do you solve that intricate challenge of growing public service to deliver a coherent outcome for Australians?
I think, oh man. So I mean, do you happen to know how many people are employed in the public service in Australia?
I don't have a number in my head.
No, I think it's about a third. Mm-hmm. I think from memory, and I could be completely wrong because I'm wrong about a lot of things. I think large organisations, and whether they're private or public, right, doesn't really matter. They're large organisations. They are inherently complex. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things that are done in public organisations, right, government institutions, that are done to minimise risk, and that creates overhead. Mm-hmm. And so, how do we potentially use technologies like artificial intelligence to fix some of those inefficiencies across the board? Mm-hmm. It's not going to fix all of the issues, but it's kind of like how do we do this moving forward? That obviously then, when you fix those inefficiencies, is where's the efficiencies come from? Is people are made redundant, right? What really needs to be happening is we need to reskill people and retrain them to do different things, okay? And I do think the way that probably in government organisations and in the public space is there is a wrapper, probably a less brutal wrapper around people rather than in corporates. Mm-hmm. Whereas corporate, right, you haven't done your job right, you're off.
Yeah, because probably in corporates you have some revenue targets.
And that's it, right? Quarterly targets. If you're listed, you've got to announce it to the market. Yeah. Then you've got super funds that are going, why didn't you hit your target? Yeah. That means we're not going to get the dividends. So they're now. So again, this is where systems thinking comes into this. Everything is really connected to everything else. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to that public side of things, is I think we do have to accept that these larger organisations have to start to accept more risk in what they're doing. and how they go out and provide services to people. Because at the end of the day, we're the customer, right? Society, and when we go and check into some of this stuff, we're the customer. But we also fund it through our taxes. So how do you find this balance of going, I want my money well spent as a taxpayer, but I also want the service that comes back to be efficient, front of mind, focused as well. But there's 27 million of us, right? Customers for some of these things from a federal perspective as well. And that's why it's really hard when we start looking at, education, coming back to where we started. If we don't train teachers in new ways of doing things, right? Supporting creativity, supporting problem solving in a different way. If we don't address that issue earlier on so that they know they're comfortable in doing that, but then putting the system around them, so how they're rewarded and recognised, KPIs that they've got. If we don't do all of that, then we'll keep doing the same stuff that we've always done. And that's what I said before, is the number one thing around creativity and innovation. If you want a different outcome, you've got to change the inputs.
I think my last, my intentional question on the AI side of it, because you have to change the education system fairly fastly, because the AI has pushed, some roles of, research and doing the basic work. If you want to write a basic report, you can do a few inputs to AI and it'll give you some basic report, and then yes, but you have to put your experience onto it. I think AI without expertise doesn't function well. You can just rely only on AI, but you need to have your own view on AI. But those are entry level jobs. Typically, you would have junior assistants or team members who would do those things. But somebody who coming out of the education system, they will do those jobs, but those jobs might be reduced. So I think the education system has to pivot fairly quickly. And as you said, that moment of 2 fingers off the cliff, that's right now from an education system point of view. So what does another next tipping point for that to happen?
Next tipping point. Look, all I can see is so my youngest daughter has just gone. She's doing her first year of uni, right? So she's doing her first assignments at the moment, and one of the assignments is a research report. So go out, find a whole bunch of research, formulate some views of what you're trying to build a report on, right? And then reference it accordingly. And then obviously write an introduction and conclusion and some recommendations. So trying to get you to think about what's being read. One of the things that was interesting in it, it said, if you use AI for any part of this report, you need to highlight what you've used AI for. And I looked at it and thought, it's almost like a knee-jerk response to going, shit, we know kids are writing reports with AI. We don't know how to stop this. So we'll ask them to be honest, right? And actually tell us when they use AI, right, to write some of these reports. And yes, there are tools that can try and scan and work it out and all that type of stuff as well. But to me, it's kind of like, you know what?
The curriculum has to change.
Because for them, where they are in their system, the genie's out of the bottle, and they're going, how do we deal with this? Oh, we'll go to the students and we'll ask them to be honest and tell us, right? The thing with AI is, I think there's going to be some amazing opportunities, right? And there is already. Right, things like taking an X-ray image and putting it through an AI image recognition pattern to find other diseases that we couldn't see with the naked eye. Those type of things. There's some amazing stuff out there, right? Developing meal plans and things. Give me a meal plan for the week. All that kind of stuff. Give me a shopping list, right? So it's kind of outsourcing in that regard. It's outsourcing the mundane. But the way it's working is it's based on historical data that it goes and finds information about. And so one of the things I'm trying to keep in the back of my mind is, if everybody is using AI and going off and doing, the same searches, whether you put your own spin on it and it learns your voice or everything else. At what point do we just get this standard beigeness across all the answers that come back, right? Whereas humans, the difference is, we will do things slightly different. You will think about a problem different to how I think about the problem, right? And that is where we'll move forward and do a lot of this, the different things in the future is because of that difference of opinion. But if everybody's using AI to do all of the crap stuff in the world or go to uni or train or whatever, at what point do we just get to that beigeness across the answers of everything? And if we do, then what do we do as human beings, right? Because you turn around and go, oh, no, the answer to this is, oh, hang on a minute, Dev, I've got to go and check. Oh, yeah, the answer to this is that. And you go, well, why would I even talk to you about that? Because I could have done it myself. And it's interesting, if you take that premise, what does that then mean for education? Because one, we've got to educate kids and we've got to train them. But at the moment, we're educating and training them to go to the next stage in the process. Kindy to primary school to high school to uni. And I think, some of the teachers that have especially been in the system for 30, 40 years, they're coming to the end of their career. They're going to go, I don't want to be trained in AI. But you know what? They might be looking after kids that are 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. They're the people that we need them to go, look at this differently. How are you doing this? Look at this technology. How do you do that? What's the problem you're trying to solve?
In preparation of a keynote speech for you, what do you do in the last couple of days? What's your process like? And what happens just before you walk onto the stage?
Okay. So for me, there's some people that do keynotes and they're very, very polished. They'll have a script. They tell their story. They're talking about whatever the topic is. Mine's kind of different because I can do that, but I don't think it's authentic enough for me and my personal brand. So what I'll often do is the way I engage with people is I'll sit down and say, what do you want the audience to leave with? And they say, what do you mean? We just want you to talk about this and fill this gap. And you go, no, I want you to know, what do you want the audience to leave with? Whether it's a question, whether it's understanding, whether it's inspired, whether it's how am I going to try and tackle something differently? And then once I've got that, then I'll actually go into what I'll go into my toolkit, and I'll kind of pull a bunch of different things together. And I'll percolate on that as the story that I'm weaving through it, right, to get to that point of what they want someone to walk away with. So I'll build it out. I use a lot of visuals, so I use a lot of imagery, right, photos, because a picture tells 1,000 words. And also when you do that, I don't have to stay on script. The picture keeps me going to get to the end point that I want to get to. A couple of days before, what starts to happen is I've worked out over the years that I'm at my most creative, and when I run through things, it's usually that semi-lucid state before I wake up. And so what will happen is probably 2 days before is I'll start to run through the story with the slides that I've been working with in my mind before I wake up. And so it can be like 3:30 in the morning when I do it, and then I do it the next day, and then you've got the actual, the day of the keynote as well. And so quite often is people will go, when you give them your speaker fee, and they go, yeah, but you're just talking about, so it's the same, isn't it? And you go, no, you don't understand. This is, and so I share with them the process, right, that I go through. And they go, oh, okay, all right, I can kind of see that now. Immediately before going on stage, and it's the same as when I run stuff online with cameras, is I always have this thing, is I always say to myself, it's showtime. And that comes back to that edutainment thing. And I think some of it is a direct response. One is to get me going, but the other side of it is when I was kind of more in my corporate career, and you'd have to go off on training, right, or go to a conference, and you would sit there and you'd be listening to a speaker that was a sponsor, because that's how they got their speaker gig. And you're just going, this is the most boring thing. I'm not entertained. I'm not going to walk away with anything. I don't know what's going on. And there's a little bit in the back of my mind that says, I want to do everything that I can so that people don't walk away going, that last hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours if it's a little masterclass or whatever, I don't want people walking away going, I didn't invest my time in that for that outcome. That was the worst thing that I've ever sat through. And I've sat through some big name, keynotes in the past as well. And you just walk away going, okay, right? And that's part of the model. But for me, it comes back to, I want people to be stimulated and entertained and a little bit thought-provoking, so that at some point in the future, they might turn around and go, oh, I remember when Andy said this, right? It forms that backstory. And they go, that's what it means now, and how can I apply that in, my day-to-day world as well?
For people at workplace or running their own business, if they want to initiate the idea of or start thinking differently or start solving smaller problems in their own span of control, what 3 things they should start doing immediately?
All right, so I think the first one is recognizing where the boundaries are with their existing role and what they want to achieve, right? I think if you're playing in the system, you're gonna get knocked down because you'll come across people and they go, no, we're not supposed to be doing this, or we need to deliver X because our performance review states that we have to deliver X, and that's not according to it. So I think the first thing is you've got to work out your field of reference around that. Okay. The second one is you've almost got to build your tribe. So you've got to build people that are going to help and support you through that. So you've got to build your misfits. And then the third thing for me is, it's probably the third. Can I have 4?
Yeah, you can have.
See, I don't like,
Yeah, you can.
So the third
You're
one...
the misfit.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? So the third one is really, you've got to understand the process. Right? And as much as I'm not a process person, I think when you start out, if you all just get together and say, oh, we're going to do this, if you don't have a bit of a process, you can go anywhere. That might be what you want to achieve, but if you're dealing with like organisational, cultural stuff in there, I think you've got to have a bit of process. And then the final one is really the problem. You've got to really define what is the problem that you're trying to solve. So what are you trying to solve for? Because if you don't have that anchor, you can go off on all sorts of different tangents. So if you're sitting there thinking about housing, trying to solve everything is going to be really complicated, because everyone's going to have a viewpoint. You've got to align the troops. You've got to get, you'll have them other people that are hanging out going, this is wrong. They'll say it's right. There'll be all this different views. But if you start doing small things and you innovate around the edges of the existing system, that's when you can start to have traction. Lovely. And so start small and then build into it, rather than go full gang-ho and, big picture, because it's probably going to hit a whole bunch of hurdles and then people will lose energy and traction and everything else for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
That's all right.